Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's edition of Wave News Extra here in our now studio. I'm Jose Sosadia on this Thursday night. It does feel like a Thursday night, but sometimes with the week we've had, the way time has passed can feel like that blur at 8:05. There will be much more to get into over the course of tonight. You know that we all work this time of the day to preparing, of course, for the main newscast coming up at 11. You might notice right now on TVs where Wave would normally be, there's a special with NBC. But we're continuing our team coverage still, of course, of this awful tragedy that has left its mark across this community in so many different degrees, not the least of which are of the families, colleagues, friends, loved ones who've been impacted by those who did lose their lives. The latest update as we start this live stream, from our understanding, was that a 13th person has died as a result of what happened with the UPS Flight 2976 plane crash. And perhaps the bit of news that was the worst to hear among the information perhaps we're waiting to find out, not necessarily disclosed by the governor, the mayor, or the NTSB, something that eventually was disclosed by the coroner's office, but now officially confirmed by UPS. And the names, and we'll make sure that is something you can follow along with our extensive coverage online, but just wanted to read the names out loud for you. So we did learn for the three men on board the plane: Captain Richard Wartenberg, First Officer Lee Truitt, and International Relief Officer Captain Dana Diamond. UPS putting in their official statement today, signed by one of their executive vice presidents, that all their hearts go out to every employee impacted and the overall Louisville community, that it continues to be a, quote, incredibly sad time for the entire UPS family. And at this point, the NTSB wrapping up, likely if they haven't already done so, but wrapping up their first full day of an investigation surrounding the crash. Among the ones we lost, a child on the ground confirmed in the path of where the plane disintegrated, as it were. The NTSB has pulled a memory unit from the voice recorder, one of those two key components from the black box. And we know tonight UPS Worldport has reopened. UPS planes are flying in as scheduled, as they would be for this Tuesday. I want to take you all to this place outside. It's this vigil when our cameras were there a little earlier in the afternoon to honor all of those victims killed in the plane crash. Mayor Craig Greenberg encouraged the community to come out to these memorials to support each other. This was the view that our reporter Julie Richardson with her photographer were able to get. Teamsters Local 89 hosting the vigil, several UPS workers, other fellow union members, elected leaders, all there. The vigil started around 5:15 at the exact time that we understand of the crash on Tuesday. The overall message being leaders are asking neighbors to not be afraid to ask for help if they needed, to support everyone who's been impacted to the different degrees in the coming weeks, months, and beyond. At the vigil, the mayor did confirm this 13th death now. You've heard probably us report on their visit to parts of the crash site that investigators are combing through. Congressman Garvey's words, a quote that has stuck out, was that visiting the site felt unreal, some things just too viscerally tough to see. And from there, we did have an opportunity to meet so many who came out to show their respects, their comfort, as much as they could to those who are grieving in their own ways throughout this tragedy. Our Julie Richardson is going to share probably many of those small conversations she had with fellow neighbors. That'll be something we'll prepare for you in our reporting tonight at 11. And while first responders continue to sift through all the debris in the expanse of the crash site, we've been getting some steady updates more and more from local and state officials. And with that, Wave News reporter David Mattingly in our team coverage shares what we have learned today.
Video released by the mayor's office reveals piles of twisted and blackened metal. The crashing UPS jet wiped out power lines as it hit structures and vehicles on the ground. The fireball that followed blasted and consumed everything it touched, complicating recovery efforts. On Thursday morning, officials could not say for certain if all bodies had been recovered from the scene.
There's so much debris there. There's so much charred, mangled metal that not all of the bodies may have been located until you look underneath certain things. And so that is going through the various layers of debris.
Greenberg described a process of delayering as teams deconstruct twisted debris in search of victims. Firefighters were also still on the scene, keeping an eye on hotspots, places throughout the half-mile debris field where possible parts of the shattered aircraft could recombust.
Because they're so deep-seated and because it could be a component of the aircraft itself, we don't want to get in there and move things around in order to not mess up the investigation.
And here at Louisville Muhammad Ali International tonight, a sign of progress. The final runway that had been closed after the accident has now been reopened. David Mattingly, Wave News.
Our thanks to David for that update. And in all of our reports, of course, we rely on videos, pictures, and just the dozens upon hundreds that so many different perspectives recorded with their phones or cameras in their cars. But just their own vantage point of the crash is closer as far as they might have been. And even now, newer images of some people running for their lives. While all that was still going on, first responders had to run toward the flames to try to stop this inferno from growing any more. So with that, our Logan Perone in our team coverage extended his work today to try to meet firefighters about what they saw firsthand. Well, not only did many run into the danger, the team at the Kentucky Air National Guard Fire Department was one of the first to do so. They had 4 units, 8 crew members on scene about 6 minutes after the crash. Being the first ones out there, their focus was to get as much foam on the fire as they could, create a path for countless other agencies to get in and then do their part to stop the blaze. A couple of weeks ago, the department actually did take part in a simulated plane crash training scenario right on the very same grounds. One of the 8 firefighters there that very afternoon spent some time with us and told us that that same exercise came in very handy, to put it very plainly, but it was a very useful experience to have handled the horrific incident as it was playing out in real time.
It was all kind of fresh in our mind, and training just really kicked in. You have a position, you have a job, and whatever you're told to do, you do it.
Now, their job continued into the next day, and in these images from the Air National Guard, the department there, as their crews were out through Wednesday, went back out to the Petroleum Recycling Center, testing for airborne toxic chemicals, still very dangerous, toxic scenes. We're told, by the way, the department handles a couple of calls that they may need to deal with each month. For the most part, before this, there was nothing so serious that perhaps our ears listening to police scanners or fire scanners would have necessarily thought it was something earth-shattering or so dangerous and deadly on a large scale. But the Master Sergeant Kyle Miller, who you just heard from there, the Air National Guard Fire Department, Miller says that what we all witnessed Tuesday for his crew, was a, quote, once-in-a-career moment of service and trying to do the best that he and his crew could do in that moment. Now, businesses near the crash site also still trying to process everything that happened. For example, Stooges Bar and Grill missed being hit. They were so close at the moment the plane went down. This is where our Fernando Garcia Franceschini wanted to check out some of the work that they're now doing to give back to their community. At some points, there's only so close that our cameras could get to Stooges Bar and Grill, and the closest that staff themselves can still get to as well. The owner telling us she was able to go in for a second to get payroll checks. That was it. The place is going to stay shut down for a while because there's still some contamination concerns. Aside from the impact to the business, the crash, especially difficult for the people at Stooges because this involves UPS employees, of how close they are to the airport, to UPS's operations at Worldport. Stooges owner telling us UPS workers themselves, very regular customers to the restaurant.
I've known some of these guys from UPS for 40 years, and like Woody, and Tim. And, I mean, I've known them for so many years. They started out as part-time supervisor, and now some of them getting ready to retire, or some of them has retired. That's how long I've known them. And good people, good hardworking people.
And she calls them the backbone of her own business. But again, that commerce for her at Stooges right now on pause because of what happened to the crash. They are partnering with O'Dolly's to host a fundraiser for employees since they are out of work now. And that fundraiser, Fernando learned, is going to happen next Thursday on November 13th. I want to show you some new images that we compiled into the sort of loop. And the first, just some context for you all. This is courtesy from Vantor. They collected new satellite imagery of Muhammad Ali International Airport, the aftermath of this MD-11 model plane crash. You're going to see in some of the images, 90-meter gash caused by the crashing plane. Eventually, you're going to see before and after images taken by Vantor. This is the gash visible on the roof of a UPS warehouse immediately adjacent to the end of the runway where the crew was desperately trying to do whatever it could to avoid any more collateral. And as far as the large path of debris, that extends on Vantor's measurements, guesstimates, approximately 850 meters from the damaged warehouse to the end of the very debris area, which I believe this, if we're waiting for the before and the after to show up. And sometimes you could see kind of where there's sort of the path is more or less, it doesn't continue beyond the top right corner of the screen, but tearing through burned cars, vehicles, and pavement immediately south of the airport runway. So as we play this loop, and again, you saw sort of the general overall view of Muhammad Ali Airport, and then now just sort of taking these pieces from the sky of the gash again on the UPS warehouse, the before and the after, where the path continues to go based on the imaging. You're going to see it's coming from the bottom left of your screen, and then it continues to tear up and to the right, just charring and mangling everything else that is in its way right there. We do have more to share with you here on tonight's edition of Wave News Extra. Part of it is a conversation we're having here in studio with Wave News reporter Meredith Lee, among many of our reporters or journalists in the team, just covering the many different angles, the impacts of this devastating tragedy. And part of that is her telling us what she learned with some insight in interviewing a former NTSB member and investigator with himself his own experience and career of going to disaster zones and crash sites like this, and discussing perhaps what is next for the NTSB. And again, based on his experience, because we're not in this current room itself with the GO team, but to the best of his abilities, what he expects is going to play out in the next days, weeks, and beyond. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and be right back with this update and much more here on Wave News Extra. All right, everyone, thanks for coming back for this segment on tonight's edition of Wave News Extra. For tonight, I want to welcome in our Wave News reporter, Meredith Lee. Meredith, I believe this might be the first time you've come in to join us in the studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming in. I know, we talk about sort of our team coverage in what has been just, awful, horrifying, devastating circumstances, and sort of the extent to which our newsroom has been sort of reaching out to so many different sources, trying to get as much perspective and context about what happened Tuesday afternoon. Just for folks to catch up on what some of Meredith has been reporting over the week, last night at around 11 o'clock was more the discussion about some environmental concerns. And that may be something that, because it's still so early in this, we will probably stay on top of checking in with our sources, asking for confirmations questions about what they'll be checking in the air, in the water, materials, things like that. But today, Meredith, we're going to discuss sort of what the insight is from folks who we haven't met anybody on the GO team out there on the ground just yet. We do know kind of who's involved, but you had the chance to sit down with someone who's a former board member of the NTSB and very familiar with what all it takes to do the necessary work to kind of make sense of what is a disaster zone out there, right?
Absolutely. So I guess we'll start off by talking about how the reason why we can't necessarily speak with the people that are on the ground right now is because they are busy at work. The first 24, 48 hours in an investigation is going to be pretty critical in teeing up the rest of what they're doing on the scene. So I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to speak with John Golia. He is a former NTSB board member, as you mentioned, who has done hundreds of investigations, many applying to aircraft crashes and disasters that are similar in nature. So really, their main focus is getting as many teams on the ground as possible. They sent over a team of about 28 people from the NTSB with all sorts of specialties. You can take a listen to what he said.
And this would be John talking about what the team makeup looks like in essence, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see if we can bring John up here.
They'll launch a team with a full battery of investigators, every specialty that there is, flight crew issues, 2 or 3 different teams for dealing with issues in the cockpit. They have a couple of teams dealing with maintenance issues, including the record keeping for the airplane. And then we have human factors people. We have eyewitness folks that go out and gather statements from people that may have seen it, and also try to collect all the video.
And he broke down for me what they're looking at. It's everything, in short.
Because you have to think of everything, and sometimes, when you're on the outside, you think, okay, maybe my net, as it were, in this analogy, is not cast wide enough. And to think, for example, with John mentioning that you probably do have to have designated people going out there and interacting with survivors or folks who they've mapped out in the crash site in the zone that was impacted. But it's just to say, like, we're the ones, like, we're the liaisons. We're going to come meet you. And then based on everything you tell us, like, we have to add that to the overall investigation.
Exactly. So there is that human element of looking at the witnesses, who was there and who was in the area during the time of the plane crash. But then there's also mapping out where the physical debris and the evidence is. Part of this is that the engine came off and landed. Golia stressed the importance of this being a major discovery for the NTSB. They're going to take some on the ground looks at that. They're going to assess what they can gather as it's lying on the ground, from where it fell to what condition it's in, what parts might have broken off within that engine. And then they're going to bring that back to DC as well. They're going to run some metallurgical exams, possibly some x-rays to see what the internal structure is. And that could help them along their investigation. Now, the other part is the black box. They had a team that was able to recover that.
And we can bring that video back up. What's interesting too, Meredith, as you mentioned, is, I wonder, we now know based on NTSB photos that they've published and released that, they're in possession of it. Now, where they move it into a mobile lab, if they bring it back to DC, it'll be interesting to, confirm that for ourselves. But in you talking to John about...
He did tell me about what they're doing specifically with that black box.
Okay, so excellent. So talk to us through what happens to the black box. And then just because I know that you had this conversation with John, the engine feels like such a critical piece, and they have to be very careful about how and what they do with that, right?
Right.
Well, we can
So
start
they'll
with the
be
black
transporting
box.
that very carefully. And then They did confirm to us today in some pressers that they were able to get that black box back to DC already. They're giving that an initial quick read is what they call it. That's where they're going to go through and they're sifting out how many flights that this audio box was recording. And they're going to get a baseline of when the flight that crashed began and ended. Within that time frame of the recording, they're going to look for anything that pops out. And that, for those crews on the ground, helps give them more of that map of an area of where to look. So they're going to hear parts in the recording that might say, we just lost an engine. They're going to map out the path of the flight as well for where that happened. And so they're going to send their teams of investigators on the ground to look in those areas for additional evidence to recover. That's part one of the black box. Then after that, they're going to get some more experts in there to sort out whose voices are on these recordings from that crew that was in the plane. And from that, that's when they're going to assemble more of their timeline and what we're going to see in the transcript that Golia is expecting to be released within the next 6 months.
Did Golia touch with you the thing that perhaps I wasn't expecting, but we had board member Inman in the presser today say that they don't disclose the audio. They are the ones who are going to listen to the audio themselves, but what they will publish then is just the transcript, the words. I imagine as an ethical protocol that it would just be the most awful thing to know that becomes public knowledge. But I guess, in some fashion, they're going to disclose what these men's final words on Earth were to see how that all is going to inform their ultimate investigation and conclusion, right?
Well, yes, we do have to recognize that this is the unfortunate and tragic part of it, that these are the last recorded words of that crew that was on the plane as they were confirmed to be dead after this collision. So after this crash. This recording that's in the black box is under lock and key, as you mentioned. It's only for the ears of the NTSB. And what we see in the report that's released is only what they're calling the pertinent information. Those other words that were shared, maybe in their final moments as they realized that they might not survive, that is not going to be released maybe to anyone except for the families, if that. So that's still a question that's up in the air. That rest of the transcript of the pertinent information, we might get some bits and chunks of that in the coming weeks as far as what's going to be included in the preliminary report, but that will be released in full of the pertinent information with the rest redacted, again, in a separate report. Golia is expecting within the next 6 months.
For sure. And to your point, though, about what John is describing, and this is based off, of course, all his own experience, and he thinks it could take those 6 months. It could then stretch to 9 months. You both discuss, kind of different parts of the timeline as he expects it, because he's not going to be in the room, but just based off of all that, expert understanding, like, I think this is where the beats of what's going to happen from here on out, and the timeline that themselves, the NTSB, I'll call it the checklist that they're going to have to cross off and step by step.
Yes, as they're assembling these reports, he said that the unspoken rule within the organization was internally that they were given about a year's time frame to put together their preliminary reports. Now, John mentioned to me a couple different instances where those final reports took up about 5 years or so based on the intensity of the information. But things have also changed in the past couple of years. You can hear him talking about how this timeline has changed and how it might apply in this scenario.
Today, because of a number of factors, not the least of which is the budget crunch that the NTSB has had for a number of years, they've stretched out these reports and given themselves an extra year to get them done. So today, a big report like this might take 2 years.
He himself said, his expectation, but given current circumstances, is 2 years. And, I was having this discussion, I know you weren't in here, with retired U.S. Air Force pilot Sean Dawley, and his own experience in saying, for us on the outside to understand, to be patient, because there's going to be this very natural rush to want to speculate or think you can have enough pieces to come to a conclusion. But perhaps, in your conversation with John, it's like saying, sure, it's 2 years, if that is enough time for these folks to get everything they need, right?
Yeah, the natural human response is you see a tragic incident like this and you want the answers and you want them now. That seems to give a little bit of closure for the families and those who have been impacted by a tragedy of this scale and help lay those souls to rest, really. But with the information that they're looking at, with the research that they're taking from the scene, and in the days, weeks, months following, as they x-ray parts like the engine that may be detached, as they look for that debris and they're mapping out the debris that fell from the smoke plume, that is something that is going to take quite a significant amount of time and funding to be able to do.
To your point, then, if we can bring up, because that could be a subset of its own challenges. So, and to hear John describe a budget crunch over years, he might describe as like different years where maybe they have a little bit of surplus, other years they may not. Our current circumstance, the NTSB also has to function during a government shutdown.
Exactly.
But just understanding, there's that they had to consider. But I know for a fact, Meredith, you and I were discussing, we're all creatures of a modern world. The NTSB, they don't live in a vacuum. They might work trying to isolate themselves as much as they can to focus, but in a challenge to sort of sift through what is valuable, accurate information and what is probably not true or accurate that they could suss out, right?
Yeah, and that budget crunch is a little bit what I'm going to be touching on in my story for later. But also talking about the massive scale of information at hand. One of the things that they're going to be gathering a lot of information from, in addition to those eyewitness testimonies that are on the scene or around the scene of the incident, is going to be what was posted on social media. This has been proven to be a very helpful tool in emergency situations, especially when it comes to natural disasters. Posts on social media can help indicate where people have been affected and who needs help and how fast, what resources they need.
Yeah.
In this case, it's providing a lot of different perspectives. We've seen that doorbell video footage. We've seen dash cam footage. We've seen video that's been posted from people who were sitting on the tarmac in other planes as well. However, there is a challenge when it comes to social media, and it's the rise of generative artificial intelligence. This is not something that's been seen in really previous transportation disasters in the past, because that technology simply didn't exist yet, and it also wasn't as convincing now as it is. This is a tool that's available to the public widely, and it's free for most. All of that information is going to be brought in to that subset of data that the NTSB is going to be combing through. They're not going to be able to say this is fake right off the bat, because they have to go and verify it.
Well, sure.
Just like we as journalists verify the credibility of the information that we receive and put out there for our reporting, it's their job to do that too, except their scale is much more massive in this case.
And it is a new frontier worth pointing out. And the reason I bring this point up is to shout out for Meredith and her own reporting. When you've been in a similar situation, which she has, if you all remember that train catastrophe in East Palestine, and remind me how many years ago that was.
Back in February of 2023.
And it feels like a long time ago, unfortunately, but that's just, it feels like with our jobs, with the news you follow, sometimes it's hard to keep track of the actual timelines. But to your point, back in 2023, that I remember, generative AI was not widely available, but B, it was
that really didn't exist outside of ChatGPT, and it wasn't maybe in its earliest stages. Yeah.
And even the ability to create semi-convincing images just wasn't feasible back then. And we'd all like to think, if you're on the younger set of consumers who might be more well versed in digital literacy, and you're like, I can tell that's AI, I can tell that's not AI. Well, these investigators can't take that for granted.
And a strange phenomenon we're seeing too, this is kind of a sidebar here, is that with these videos that we're seeing come in, you look at the comments of them being posted on social media and people are having to ask, is this real? I mean, I think that really just speaks to how tragic this incident was, and that so many people saw it with their own eyes, and I still can't believe it.
So when you talk to perhaps someone with so many years of experience like John, who was out there on the ground for all those years, again, he's part of this modern world. Is that something he feels like is you have to take into consideration now?
Absolutely. Now, in a general case, when they're working within the NTSB and collecting all that information, they're looking forward to that backlog of all that extra information. But now it could be a bit of a headache, and it could impact the timeline of how quickly they're able to get the results and all the different angles sorted out from this event with that genuine video.
So the short answer is yes. That's very dangerous for the investigators, because all of us can be impacted from what we see, both during the accident and after.
Yeah, he said before and during, Meredith.
Yeah, before, during, and in the wake of the incident. This is when we're going to see more of those videos crop up. If we haven't seen them already on social media, those artificial intelligence generated videos.
So we could spend, more than just this segment. This could extend into hours of, just how much more there is for them to consider, for us to, try to follow along with them as best.
And
as we
imagine
can,
the
as close as we
discussions
can.
that are taking place behind the scene as well.
And us finding out too, I believe NTSB's Todd Edmond was saying that wrapping up last night's day of their own meetings, they were done at 9:30 at night. So who's to say, a full day's work could consist of, 2/3 of your day, the 16-hour shift, who knows how long, then out there collecting and trying to start the investigation in earnest. For folks to join us tonight on Wave News at 11, Meredith, you touched a little bit on it, but just let the folks know perhaps some more of what you're reporting and you're looking into that we'll be able to tune in to follow you with tonight at 11.
And so tonight at 11, I'm going to basically break this down again of who is taking an active role on the scene based from John Golia's experience, how this has changed over time, the way these investigations are carried out, and some of those challenges as far as the budgetary and social media authenticity concerns.
All right. Well, we do appreciate your time. Our Wave News reporter, Meredith Lee, being here in the studio. However much longer, but we know it will be for our reporting continuous coverage on this, having you on board and having so many other members of the team spanning and trying to reach as many people and get their perspectives and accurate information as possible is going to be crucial for our community, of course, as they're grieving. But of course, Meredith, part of the night team, along with our Julie Richardson. Meredith will, certainly be joining us much more often here in the Wave Now studio. And it may not be every day, but just whenever.
We'll do our best to schedule it in.
Whenever the schedule and the timeline for reporting the stories matters, but we do enjoy having Meredith here in the studio. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to bring my perspective to the table.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break and be right back with much more of tonight's Wave News Extra. Welcome back in, everyone, to Wave News Extra. Here in the studio, we'll make the time for sort of certain pieces of interview, our own reporting that for whatever reason, just sometimes it's hard to also include in the newscast. But, we have our newscast that start from the morning, head into the evening. So opportunities to have these longer form discussions like we just had inside the studio here with Meredith. And also perhaps seizing an opportunity for such a wide-stretching, wide impact story like with what happened by SDF with the UPS plane crash for insight and, of course, course, that also brings, so many different kinds of other journalists, reporters, from further away outside of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to cover what is such a massive story of so much interest, of so much heartbreak to so many people. To that end, in coverage, sometimes you will run into folks who have the sort of wealth of experience as correspondents when it comes to aviation issues, space travel issues, when they do present themselves. And our Wave News reporter, Marissa Burke, spent some time today talking to NBC's senior aviation correspondent, Tom Costello. So what we're about to play for you is from pretty much from the beginning to end of Marissa and Tom's discussion, her questions to Tom about his thoughts coming here to the ground, landing in Louisville, assessing and trying to report the story in his own way, relying on sources and contacts, the past experience, and what'll be something that he will be trying to connect or publish, disclose, share with viewers and those trying to get as much information as they can as well. So to that end, I want to share Marissa's interview with Tom Costello here.
Tom, let's talk about what we saw here in Louisville on Tuesday. What can you tell us? We know the investigation is really starting like yesterday.
Well, the black boxes are now at the NTSB lab in Washington, the flight data recorder and also the cockpit voice recorder. That's going to be critical for this investigation. The investigators are pretty confident that they will pull good data off of those boxes despite the intense fire, and we know that they were charred. The flight data recorder has thousands of parameters of data recorded on it. Everything about the performance of the engines, the aircraft overall performance, telemetry data, all of that. The cockpit voice recorder will record not just the cockpit voices, but also all of the sounds in the cockpit, the whistles, the bells, somebody flipping a switch. That will tell them an awful lot about what was happening in the cockpit just before this crash.
Okay, and they're going to be reviewing not just the actual moment of that crash, but hours and hours of footage before that, correct?
Yeah, the NTSB will look back not only at this flight, but all of the flights in recent weeks, and indeed also the maintenance record, because as we know, this plane was in maintenance back in September and October down in San Antonio. A big critical question is, why did the pylon and the number one engine on the left side detach from the wing? Because that appears to have happened pre-crash. Now, there are eerie similarities to a crash in 1979 involving the DC-10. The DC-10 was the forerunner to the MD-11. And in that crash in Chicago, quite literally, the number one engine and the pylon detached from the wing, and it doomed that plane. It crashed, killing everybody on board. They later determined that that pylon and the engine had been damaged during a maintenance check. So the question now is going to be, did anything happen to this plane, or was that pylon recently checked? Was the engine recently checked? And did they verify that, in fact, it was reinstalled properly? That'll be some of what the NTSB looks at.
Okay, and we still have a long ways to go before we get to that point in this investigation, because like you said, they just got the boxes.
I think the NTSB very quickly is going to look at the maintenance records, the inspections from recent inspections, but also dating back months. And they're going to look very closely at what happened during the maintenance check in San Antonio and whether that number one engine and the pylon that holds it in place were in any way dealt with, affected, worked on back then.
And see, I've just learned about how our independent pilot association that works with the UPS pilots, how they also are integral in working with different safety rules, like the crash that happened in 2010 and 2013. What's changed since then? Any projections on what could change? Or I know the investigation is still so early, it's hard to pinpoint so many different things with this one.
Every plane crash is unique, usually, because they're different models, they have different circumstances. You look for any evidence linking specific crashes over the years. But in this particular case, I can tell you, I know firsthand that some UPS pilots right now are nervous about flying this MD-11 until they have a better handle on what caused this crash and whether there is a systematic issue they need to be worried about with the MD-11. They simply don't know right now.
And see, I asked about if the MD-11s were getting phased out, but they were like, that's a UPS question, because I know this plane has been around for several decades.
This particular plane is 34 years old. It flew as a passenger plane for a while, then it switched over to cargo about 19 years ago. That's not uncommon. And the MD-11 right now is almost uniquely and only flown as a cargo plane all over the world. But the question's going to remain, is there a problem beyond this one plane? Is there a problem with the MD-11s that are in service as cargo planes around the world? The NTSB is going to get into that.
And I heard that, you've been doing this for so many years. You have a close relationship with the NTSB, but there also might be a Kentucky tie with the investigation in the NTSB.
Well, the NTSB has investigators all over the country, but the board member who is here right now, Todd Inman, he's based in Washington, D.C. He is also, as it happens, from Kentucky. So there is this Kentucky synergy. But nonetheless, this is going to be a very methodical investigation, adhering to the strictest principles of the NTSB. This is not going to be fast. The NTSB takes its time. In 30 days, they'll usually issue a preliminary report, simply notifying all of us what they have initially found, but not drawing any conclusions. And then the investigation will take up to a year. We may not know for a year exactly what caused this plane to go down, but we will start to get clues over the coming days and weeks and months.
Tom, is there anything else that I haven't asked about that you feel like we should know about?
It's too early to draw conclusions about what caused this crash, but clearly the NTSB is focused on that left engine and that pylon that was supposed to hold it in place. Why did that come loose? Was there anything that had happened to that plane, either on the ground here in Louisville or in maintenance, that might have led to that? We simply don't know, but that is a prime focus. And the biggest question right now is whether this is a unique situation to this one MD-11, or whether there might be other MD-11s out there flying cargo flights that have a similar type of a flaw. We simply don't know.
And I wish I had one of the many videos that we've all been showing so that we could kind of go through it a little bit if you could see things. But I know you've seen the video.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can speak to? Like we see those moments leading up to it. Is there any? I know it's hard to do just kind of off the memory.
No, I know what you're talking about. The video does seem to show that wing, that engine was on fire before the plane, of course, then careened out. Let me say it differently. The video does seem to show that wing was on fire and that the pylon and the engine had detached from the wing before the crash. So this is unusual that we actually have that kind of video evidence, but then we actually have the engine sitting between the runways here in Louisville. That's astonishing evidence, and it is never something that we normally see in an investigation. So the NTSB has an awful lot to already start looking at. One other point. The FBI is also a part of this investigation. We should not read into that there is any suspicion that this is criminal. But they take advantage of the FBI's, let me say it differently. The FBI is also assisting in this investigation. That is not to suggest that there is any criminal activity here, but rather they're taking advantage of the FBI's expertise and the forensic expertise and gathering evidence off of that field, off of the runways, so that the NTSB can do a full analysis. But that's normal in this investigation. The FBI comes in to assist.
So thanks to Marissa Burke for that insight from NBC's senior aviation correspondent Tom Costello there on the ground inside Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport. But this story, the tragedy and, of course, images tonight will be fresh from the community vigil that the local Teamsters wrapped up not too long ago. We're going to have some of those images courtesy of our Julie Richardson, more reporting from our Meredith Lee, the team coverage here at Wave News continuing not just on here streaming or on TV live, but the updates that are going to be right here on wave3.com. Certainly of those updates, things that you're going to find at the very top of your screen, a whole section as we continue to follow any and every sort of lead or story impact perspective relating to this, the story that has become the news that may be the most wide impacting story of the year. Perhaps some might believe that. The scale of the impact of the tragedy that happened on November 4th. So with that, Do appreciate everyone's time checking in for tonight's update here on Wave News Extra for the live stream of the Wave Now studio. Many different ways you could always stay connected with us. That's by downloading the app, checking in on the website, and us just sharing as much of that information as we're able to find and disseminate it and let you all know what is going on. So we do appreciate that. Hope you join us tonight after the special programming on NBC. We're going to be ready for Wave News at 11. Whenever that does start, but we will be ready for our own reports there as well. Want to appreciate everyone who's joined us through the Wave Now app on their devices at home, through the Wave app, or also everyone joining us on YouTube, Twitch, X, Facebook, as we all sort of go, day by day, seeing what the investigative team can uncover and unfold for us. Appreciate your time, everyone. We're going to be back here tomorrow night at 8:05. Hope you take care. We'll see you soon.